In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. We are fresh off of a Grizzlies loss to the Dallas Mavericks last night. A highly competitive game, and a game in which the Grizzlies were up by, double digits, I think 13 points going into the fourth quarter. And it all unraveled. It all unraveled for Memphis in that fourth quarter. There's a lot to dissect from the game. I thought it was an important test for the team. People are going to talk about free throw disparity. They're going to talk about Marcus Smart. They're going to talk about the turnovers. But where does your head go this morning, Chris, the day after a difficult loss like that one?
I think that game represents sort of a new phase of the season a little bit. We just passed the quarter point of the season. The Grizzlies, I think things have gone generally pretty well for the Grizzlies. They're 14-8. We were 14-7 before that game. Top 6 offense, top 6 defense. They've run up this record despite missing tons of games, among the most missed games in the league. They've only had their top 3 players together for like less than a quarter of this start, but they've had a pretty easy schedule to this point. And I think the first level this season is our system works, our approach works, our depth is good. Now we've got our top 3 guys. It's sort of like we're a good team again. We've gotten past the funk. We're a good team again. And now the next step is like applying all of that to more serious basketball, which they haven't had to play a ton of to this point. The Grizzlies are 2-5, despite their good record overall. They're 2-5 in single digit games. They are now 0-4 in road games against good West teams, like Western playoff contender teams. And so it's like, the first step is like, we got our guys and we're good. Now the next step is being a true contending team that wins in tight playoff level basketball. And to that level, the game against Dallas last night was it was a mix of encouragement and disappointment. Like that game didn't get tight in the fourth quarter. That game was a tight, like hard fought, intense game from the jump. I thought, well, you were there in person, but on television, it looked like that was a higher level game.
The energy felt like the playoffs almost.
Yeah, 100%.
In there, yeah.
And so like they were there for it. They were playing hard. The defense was working. They were forcing turnovers. Guys like Jalen Wells weren't overwhelmed by it. You look up, you got a 13-point lead. Things are going well. And then that fourth quarter was just like kind of a cataclysm. Like we can pick it apart, but like there's more than one thing there. There's so many things. There's all the fouling. There's the fact that the offense just completely fell apart in the middle of that quarter. I don't know how many trips in a row they went without scoring. And then like Marcus Smart was just terrible. And so like all kinds of stuff was going on.
Yeah, there is a lot to sort of unpack after a game like that. And I was standing around in the locker room after the game, and I wasn't exactly sure how that was going to go, because sometimes, and we'll get into the fourth quarter, but like sometimes after difficult losses like that, like you expect that the guys are going to be really kind of angry and just thorny, and you're just not going to really get much from them. But I think the Grizzlies last night, I mean, there was a little bit of that. There was disappointment in the way that the game went. But you heard it multiple times in the locker room. We had them. We had them. We had that game. We had them. And they weren't able to just close it out against a team that was good. And, Jaren made it a point to say, look, this isn't a growing pain situation for us.
Right.
That was us stinking it up in the fourth quarter, basically. And we just have to be better than that. So like there is nothing to be learned about the finish to this game.
Yeah, I saw that from Jaron, and I like that Jaron is sort of a stand up guy about stuff. He's not one who's going to come in and start complaining about the referees and this kind of stuff. I would push back even just slightly about that. It's not a growing pains thing in the sense like this is a young team. Like this, they're not young anymore. As Jaron has pointed out many times. Like they're in their NBA like full adulthood, right? They've been to the playoffs, etc. The core of the team. But this is a new assemblage of team. Every season the team is a little bit different, and this team, has changed a lot around those three guys. And so that this team, this Grizzlies team, this assemblage of players playing together has not had a lot of reps in tight, close games yet. And I do think they need more reps in tight, close games to get a better feel for who they are and how they approach stuff in that situation. It's not growing pains necessarily, but I do think that this particular team hasn't had a lot of experience playing together in those kind of games.
Yeah, you knew that Jaron wasn't going to say anything about the officiating.
Right.
I mean, if we don't comment on the officiating, like people would go crazy. That is not the only reason the Grizzlies lost that game. It just was not.
It's not the
But
main reason. They were fouling. Some of the fouls were intentional, by the way. Like Desmond Bain wrapped up like Derek Lively twice, and like good fouls, but fouls that still cost you. Like the stupidest foul was like Marcus Smart fouling Luka, like 94 feet from his own basket with his back turned. That was like ridiculous. And some of the others was just, I don't know. I think if you run it back play by play, you will find fouls that called on the Grizzlies that weren't necessary, and you'll find fouls not called that could have been called like the other way. And so I'm not saying the officiating was great, but I do think like the Grizzlies fouled a lot.
yeah, and I think everybody acknowledged that, even the people that complained about some of the free throw disparity. The Grizzlies' frustration wasn't with the fact that they were getting called for a lot of fouls. It was the fact that they only went to the free throw line 14 times.
Right.
If you read carefully at what they had to say, it was, well, we have, John Morant and Jaren Jackson, and somehow we're at the free throw line 14 times. I think some of that was just that they shot a lot of threes early in the game. They didn't attack as much as Dallas did. But Luka does get an incredible whistle. That's just true. He gets an incredible whistle, especially at home. And it was frustrating the Grizzlies the entire game. He's going up against a rookie in Jalen Wells who's defending him. Every play he's trying to bait Jalen Wells into a foul. Personally, it's not my favorite version of basketball to watch. Just
I agree.
The attempts to draw fouls over and over again. But that was certainly a point of frustration for the team after the game.
I did miss, and I think like Luka. Let's just stipulate Luka is great. So like Luka can be great no matter what defense, no matter what's happening. Luka can just be great. And like the three guys they threw at him like acquitted themselves okay. Even looking at Luka's box score, like when you're watching it, they weren't overwhelmed. That's Jalen Wells, Jake LaRavia, Marcus Smart. But I kind of missed Vince Williams Jr. in that game. I would have liked to.
Yes.
I think Vince Williams is the player on the roster best equipped, both physically and temperamentally, to guard Luka Doncic.
Vince Williams is the best player on the roster to frustrate Luka Doncic, to annoy Luka Doncic, to make Luka Doncic angry, which I guess could go in your benefit or it could hurt you. But like that's what Vince does, is he gets under the skin of the guy he's guarding, and that would have been nice. I did think about that as well. Just especially because I remember last year, this was the game the Grizzlies won. I don't know if the Mavs had Luka. I think they did. And Vince did a good job on him. But and then I think as you look at this game again, even further, there were just too many mental lapses late.
Yeah.
Like there were just so many, and Marcus Smart took ownership of some of the plays after the game. But he was like, I'm a vet. Like you just kind of put this one away and you try to move on from it and you don't think about it. But whether it was saving the air ball that was clearly going out of bounds, like that cost them a possession and resulted in a Mavs bucket, or just some of the careless giveaways the Grizzlies had late in the game. they took themselves out of it. It felt like, you were just waiting on the inevitable Mavs run at that point. They gave them chance after chance.
I don't. People got really upset about the save the ball play. I was not as upset about that one. To me, it was the foul on Luka that was the real like, what are you doing here? Um, I think you got to account for the fact that Smart's view of the play is not the same as the view of the play people have watching television. And Luka Doncic miss airballs a three that was tightly contested. He thought it got tipped. I mean, he was wrong, but he thought it got tipped. He thought it was going to be out on Santi Aldama. That's why he tried to save it. The problem is like he stepped on the out of bounds line while trying to save it. Like, and how many times in that game did some Grizzlies step out of bounds? At least 4 times. There were at least 4 turnovers that were stepping out of bounds,
and a lot in the fourth quarter. And this is like I think that there's a lot of people that could look at the box score after the game and they were frustrated looking at the difference between the way that Dallas played and the way that or Jason Kidd used his stars and Taylor Jenkins used his stars, and there was close to a 10-minute difference between some of Dallas's best players and Memphis's best players.
This is an interesting thing, and I've got a question. I'm doing a mailbag column this week, and I got a question that I think it's probably worth more than like a 2 or 3 paragraphs. I'm gonna give it a mailbag, but I'll start there. And it's this question of: is it possible that Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson, in particular, are better players, or the Grizzlies think they're going to be better players in fewer minutes? Meaning, the level of the way that they play, the way their bodies are, especially now that Ja's playing defense, and Jaren is sort of has the high usage with the defense. Are they able to play the way they play because they're playing 30 minutes? And if they're playing 38, they're not going to be as good per minute. I don't know what the answer to that is. I think it's an interesting way to think about it. But I still can't get past looking at a game like last night when the offense like just bogs down in the middle of the fourth quarter, you can't score, and thinking like 2 more minutes of Ja Morant, maybe that's the difference in this game. Like, it is a hard thing to look at as a fan. You look at the box score and you lose by 5 on the road, and their star plays over 40 minutes and your star plays 31. That's just a hard thing to get past.
Santi made a layup, I think with 8 minutes and 36 seconds or around there. I would have to go back and double check this, but like right around there in the fourth quarter, I think they took Ja off the court around that time too. They didn't score with Ja off the court until he came back in the game late. And then he made the 3-pointer. They might have had a couple free throws, but they didn't have a single field goal for an extended stretch. And in the middle of it, they turned the ball over 4 times. That's where they lost the game.
Yeah, but there's sort of the offense just cratered when Ja was off the floor and they had that long stretch. And to me, that was almost as important as all the fouling, right? Is that you stop scoring for a while. But I would counterbalance that by saying when they brought Ja, Jaren, and everybody back in, they did have a multi-possession lead. Like, they still had the lead when those guys came back in. And the offense didn't exactly start clicking when they came back in. I think if you're looking at that game as like a new phase, like what is playoff basketball going to look like, that's what we have to figure out now. Like, we figured out regular season basketball. Like, okay, well, quarter in, we're good at regular season basketball. Check. How can we prepare for playoff basketball? The offense was just called 12 the last 3 minutes of that game, and it wasn't that good. And like, whatever you're doing as a team with your team offense did not happen down the stretch of that game. And so this constant multi-year question about better half-court basketball and playoff level situations, that is now a big question going forward that they got to get better at.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely the case. And like at the start of the game and the end of the game, especially, Dallas took Memphis out of everything that they wanted to do. Like, if you're taking the ball out of the net after a Luka ISO where he's backing down for 10 seconds and then hitting a turnaround or a step back jumper, it's really hard to get in transition, right? And so like that Dallas controlled, I thought, the beginning of the game and the end of the game. Memphis controlled the middle portion of the game, and that's what built them the lead. But I think that's right. Whatever they were trying to do was not working, and it was kind of get the ball to Ja and get out of the way, which, I mean, was a good strategy early in the fourth quarter as he was just scoring repeatedly. But then when he came back in, They didn't really have the answers for that, and it just wasn't a great Jaren game, to be honest. Like he's been really, really good for this team this year, so it's really hard to dish criticism on Jaren
Yeah,
at all. But
he hit the two threes early, but that's six of, I think, his 14 points on the game, like right out of the gate, right? And then he didn't do a lot else the rest of the way. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and he's been so dependable, like just incredibly dependable this season. And he took ownership and said, "I look that just wasn't a great game for me, and I got to be better than that." So, lot to unpack there. Well, let's get a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about these players individually. But first, let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
You mentioned Ja, and his defense in particular. I felt like he was the best defender on the court for the Grizzlies last night, or close to it. I mean, Jalen Wells did it. He tried with Luka. I mean, he said a few of them were rookie mistakes. Luka did get him on, luring him into a couple fouls. But I thought the job that Ja did defensively and sort of the intensity that he brought on that end, and he has brought all season, has been really, really noticeable.
Well, they didn't, and you'd have to go. I mean, you don't have one guy guarding one guy for the whole game. Kyrie Irving did go 3 of 14, and that was Ja's assignment to begin the game. And I did notice one play early on, and I don't even know. I don't think it was a steal. I don't know if it even registered on the box score, but there was a play early on where like Ja's ISO'd on Kyrie behind the 3-point line, and just sticks with him and tracks him all the way in, and like it was like a 5 or 6 second possession of Kyrie with the ball and Ja not stick it on him, and I think he ended up like missing a jump shot on that. 3 steals for Ja, matches the previous season high I think from the previous game. So yeah, I just think this has become. I think this is something that's been there from the jump, and it started to get talked about in the last week. But he's put in a lot more effort defensively this season. But that sort of backs up the earlier point of if he's still like this high usage, high impact offensive player, and he's now expending all this effort on defense. You wonder about the 32-minute Ja versus the 38-minute Ja at that level of play, given his frame physically.
It just feels like you could pick your spots to get him on the court longer. They're going to have to do that by the playoffs, right?
Yeah,
you can't.
That's been my instinct. It's like when you have the game where he only needs to play 23 minutes and you win big, like that should buy you the ability to let's go, But the question is not. There's one question of the guys wearing down over time and having them fresh for the playoffs. The other question is, and this is the thing that the person in my mailbag brought up that I don't quite know the answer to, but I think it's an interesting point. Within the game itself, do you get a worse Ja if you play a heavy minutes Ja? Because he wears down in the game. I don't know about that. I think if you do that game in, game out, that might be true. But if you're doing that one tight game in the course of a week, I don't know if I buy that.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I'm talking about individually in a game.
Yeah.
Over the course of a game, you're talking about being able to play them 23 minutes in one game, 38 the next, whatever. To me, individually, within a course of a game, I feel like you could also pick your spots if you're Ja to go back to being last year's Ja and then come back to being this Ja that's so intense on defense and saving some energy, I guess, there so that you can play more minutes because they need him offensively. They really need him offensively.
But to step back from whatever your opinion, not you specifically, but anyone listening, whatever any of our opinions are about it, to me, what's most notable about this game is that it underscores this is what they're doing. Whether you like it or not, this is what they're doing. It's a 5-point loss on the road, and 31 from Ja, 31 from Bane, 29 from Jackson. And you could say, well, Jackson fouled out, Bane had foul trouble. That's not the reason those numbers are so low. Jackson fouled out with 5 seconds left in the game on an intentional foul. They didn't want to play him more. That's the thing. They don't want to play these guys heavy minutes. that could be the right decision or the wrong decision. But I think what's notable first more than anything else, this game illustrates that is their approach. You
Yeah.
know, there are four Dallas Mavericks players played more than anybody on the Memphis Grizzlies team.
Yeah, you cannot be. I mean, if you want to be frustrated with the overall strategy, fine. But like to yell over an individual game in which the Grizzly Stars play fewer minutes, like
It's every
you're gonna
game.
get tired of that fast because it's every game, right?
Yeah.
So that's just the way that this is going to be. But it did feel like if you could get like, especially in a game where Ja was just that he was in the second half clearly their best offense. And they didn't have much offense outside of him. It felt like if he could have stayed on the floor in that fourth quarter, maybe things could have been a little different. But I don't know. Maybe he would have run out of gas. But um, nonetheless, still a point of frustration for some of the fan base for sure. You wrote about, and I'm going to write about soon. Got some interesting stuff from Brandon Clark for a shoot around yesterday. But you wrote about Brandon and Marcus. Timing
How
Marcus
about the
thing.
timing?
Come on.
It's a column curse, right?
I mean, what the heck, dude? Yeah, I actually talked to Marcus too yesterday morning, not on the record, but we were just chatting. Did you know you'd probably find it surprising? Marcus Smart does not have his jersey retired by his high school in the Dallas area. Uh, I had a very interesting conversation with him about that. Um, because of some Texas sports high school politics, it sounds like.
Huh.
Um, but anyway, he obviously had a real tough one last night. But you wrote about it before the game, and he was on a good run leading up to this game. I've had the chance to just skim through the story, but I guess what were your general takeaways about Marcus Smart's resurgence coming off the bench prior to last night?
Well, I think it's interesting that Clark and Smart, they've sort of switched roles over the course of the season. Like the start of the season, Marcus Smart was the starter, and Brandon Clark was supposed to be like the sixth or seventh man, or that's what he was. And they both got off to really bad starts to the season, and they sort of switched roles with Brandon Clark starting and Marcus Smart, who's really sort of off the bench. He's been like the 10th guy off the bench, but he tends to play more than that. So he's been like a key reserve. And they both played much better in those roles. I think that's coincidence. I don't think that's why they're playing better. But I do think it sort of makes sense. I think it fits. I think Marcus Smart coming off the bench sort of makes sense for this team because when you have Ja, Dez, and Jaron all in the starting lineup, you don't need a lot of playmaking with them necessarily. So I think Wells and Clark is more play finishers, defense and play finishing makes sense. And then Marcus Smart off the bench, to be a little bit more active, I think makes sense in that role. And, I think the thing with Smart is sort of new to the Grizzlies, but he's not new to the NBA. And so Marcus Smart is not as bad a player as he was early this season. And Marcus Smart is also like a classic trick or treat player. He's a guy who makes really great instinctive plays and then makes boneheaded plays. And that has been his reputation throughout his career. And so, it's new to the Grizzlies. It's not new to the league. I think fans had gotten too down on Smart based on some of his early play. And what he did during that winning streak is he's done stuff like that his whole career. A game like last night, though, he's had games like that too. And so, I think the Grizzlies need Marcus Smart and Brandon Clark to be, as the team is currently constructed, setting aside trades or whatever, they need those guys to be major parts of a playoff rotation because those are veteran guys who can play defense at a playoff level. And they need those guys to be part of an 8-9 man playoff rotation. And they both got off to really bad starts. And I think over the past week, last night accepted for Marcus Smart, they've gotten back to being that level, that kind of player that the Grizzlies, I think, need them to be.
I think if you read between the lines, I'm not sure Marcus Smart loves coming off the bench.
No, he doesn't. I wrote about that in the piece. He's made it pretty clear that he talked about, when you're on one team and you're starting the whole time and you're on a different team, you're coming off the bench, people wonder why that's happening, but I'm just going to hone in on my opportunity, etc. he sees it. I think he sees it as a little bit of an insult. I think players tend to see that designation as important. I don't think it's actually that important for the team, and I think it makes sense to bring him off the bench.
Yeah, and it's not even that. It's just like every time he's asked about, well, if you're coming off the bench, do you get to see how the game is going and then react to that when you get out there? And he's just like, no, there's really no advantage. I just do the same thing.
Right.
So I don't think that's something that he loves. And I find it interesting. Like I've asked Marcus if it stung watching the Celtics win the championship last year, and he said yes, absolutely. Like, you know, it's kind of painful, sucks, especially when you play on that team for 10 years, and now he's in Memphis with a new group, a team that can be competitive in the Western Conference, you would think. And it just feels like for him, to have the up and down start and then move to the bench, like it's probably been pretty challenging for him, especially not playing much last year too. Like that was the first time he had ever missed the playoffs in his career. Um, but he continues to insist that he's a vet. He's continued to try to handle it professionally. And even last night, like I had to ask him about the game and the performance, and he was like, you know what? Just put this one away. Try not to think about it. Move on to the next one. I've been in the league for 10 plus years. I've had tough ones before, and that's it. Um, and so I found that to be interesting. On the Clark stuff, I had a I'll give some of it away. I had a fascinating conversation with Brandon yesterday morning about because there's been a lot of conversation about the Achilles and his bounce and all that. Yet he's shooting a really good percentage from the field, and he's really found a groove as of late. And I thought he played pretty well, especially in the first half against Dallas. Brandon shared with me that even as he came back for that 10-game cameo at the end of last year, like his rehab was essentially not finished at that point.
Right.
It wasn't like, oh man, you've wrapped up just in time to make it to this season and play the 10 games. Like now you get to go into the summer and you get to focus on basketball and not rehabbing the calf. That was not what it was. It was an opportunity to play basketball, but in the middle of finishing up rehab, and he got to the summer and he was still rehabbing his Achilles tear surgery and the calf and all of that. And like he even said at the start of this season, my body was just like banged up. Like it was just it was painful. Like it was like even trying to play through, the early games of this season, like it took us a while and the training staff a minute to make adjustments and like really get him comfortable playing basketball. Like he wasn't entirely comfortable for those final 10 games. But Brandon said like now at this stage, he finally feels like the surgery didn't happen. He's admitted to me like my calf will never be the same. Like my leg will never be the same. I'm gonna have to deal with this my entire life, and that's true, I'm sure. But he said, I'm finally not thinking about it. I'm finally just feeling like I can just go out there and play basketball. And I think that that's pretty significant. And we've seen it with the way that he's played. But I found that really interesting. Like even at the beginning of this year, I don't think Brandon was entirely comfortable. I think he was still dealing with some of the Achilles stuff, and that comes, months after his 10-game cameo.
Yeah, I sort of what I'd written about a little bit with him. It sort of touches on that. In that this idea that like he suddenly like his bounce was back and it was the old Brandon Clark. I if you watched Brandon Clark before the injury and you watch him now, I just don't think that's the case. He doesn't get off the floor as high or as quickly as he did before. But I think it's been about a double like gaining comfort with his body post injury and where he is now with the rehab, getting more comfortable with himself physically, and getting more comfortable within the context of the offense. I think that both those things have sort of been happening alongside each other. Like one of the things that's changed is he stopped taking the threes. And no one's talked about that, but I don't think it's some accident that suddenly like he goes 1 for 16 from three in the last 6 games. He hasn't attempted one. I don't think that just suddenly happened. I think there was between player and team. I think there was a tweak to stop him from taking those threes, and I don't think they've changed where he is on the floor or where he is in the offense. I think it's, there was a play last night that was like this. I think now when the ball finds itself into his hands in the corner, instead of just taking the three, he's putting it on the floor, he's passing out and going to screen. He's the idea of finding within the offense what he can and can't do and what's the best decision for him to make. I think that's something that's been evolving over the course of the season.
Yeah. The chemistry with Jaren continues to be really good. And of all of the bigs, maybe besides Jaren, Brandon Clark might be the one I trust the most to receive some of these laser beam passes and creative passes from Ja Morant around the rim and finish the play. Because, Edie as a rookie, I think, is still getting adjusted to that. Some of the other guys, you see, they have the tendency to fumble the ball a little bit. And Brandon had a couple moments last night. But to me, like that chemistry there, the fact that they've played together so long, like that goes a long way as well. I don't think it's just Brandon and Jaren. I think it's also Brandon and Ja to some degree.
No, I do. I agree. I think he has been a good fit with both of those guys in particular. Not to say he's not a good fit with Bane, but in terms of the snugness of the style of play, he's a particularly good fit with Jared and with Ja as that sort of play, because the guy, he can finish plays in the lane, he gets to open spots, and is a target for those passes. And I think that's something Edie is going to be awesome at in time, but he needs more reps. I do think it's notable that the last two games they played that have been contested in the fourth quarter, that's against Dallas and then was against New Orleans, which I think was like a 10-point game with 6 minutes to go. They finished with Santi. They didn't finish with Brandon. They came back around to the same closing lineup in both games, which was Santi Aldama and Marcus Smart instead of Brandon Clark and Jalen Wells. Well, I think that's going to change game to game in those situations, and that's something that is going to bear watching going forward as they try to figure out how they're going to approach playoff basketball. But that has been the tendency the last couple games. There's something they like about, maybe it's that they can spread out more on offense with Santi, but there's something they've liked about closing with Santi.
Jalen Wells wins NBA Western Conference Rookie of the Month. He's the first player, I believe, since Ja to do so.
First Grizzly, yeah.
Yeah, first Grizzly. That's what I meant. I thought it was well-deserved. He's off to a good start this year. What I appreciated about his game last night was here he is being put in this difficult situation, and he talked about it afterwards, where he was like, look, Luka, he knew I was defending him and I'm a rookie, and he was basically trying to get me to foul him. And I made a few rookie mistakes where I did foul him. But what I loved about Jalen Wells' performance was he airballed the three. Luka's, forcing him into mistakes. He had every opportunity to kind of put his head down in that game, but he came back in the second half and made two threes. And I thought he played pretty well, and I thought it spoke to sort of the mentality a little bit. It's a little bit like Vince Williams in a very different way has sort of that same, aura, I guess you could say. And I liked the way that Jalen Wells sort of bounced back, and he's been really impressive. He's a guy that is always even keeled, never too high, never too low, really calm. I think that's a good presence for the Grizzlies to have.
No, that's the point I was going to make. That's, to me, almost more than the defense and the shooting. It's the composure that impresses me most with him. And I think there's been a real game-to-game consistency with him that I think is related to the in-game composure and patience that he has. Those two things seem to sort of fit together. It's funny, at some point a couple of weeks ago, Dalton Connect sort of had all those hot shooting, those big scoring games, and there was all this focus on him nationally about how did the Lakers find this guy? This guy's taken off. Jalen Wells still has a higher scoring average on the season now,
Yeah.
On a deeper team. And it's not and it's because of the game-to-game consistency. He hasn't had as many. He had the one game at Chicago where the career high so far, he like 27 or whatever. But he's not having a lot of 25-point games. But he's not having a lot of 5-point games either. He's just like he's making some shots and playing defense and fitting in and producing just about every night. And you put in like the 39% 3-point shooting and the real like patient approach to offense. He'll have rookie moments here or there, but he'll get in jams and he doesn't panic. Like that's one of the things that impresses me about him. And you put that together with like solid defense. Like I don't think ideally you want him to be your number one defender on Luka Doncic in a playoff series. I think if the Grizzlies get to a playoff series with the Mavericks, I'm not sure if that'll be the case. Maybe Vince Williams is back by then. But at this point, you're 20 something games in and Jalen Wells is just like, a positive contributor like every night. And so it just is what it is, I think already.
I think you do have to give him some credit for the defense because as fans look at the league and they look at the rookies, they're just going to look at the points per game. A lot of them are.
That's right.
And I just felt that it was.
But he's still second among rookies in points per game. That's my point.
I know
everything else.
I know, but like, I hope Jalen Wells is getting credit for what he's doing defensively because it's pretty impressive. Like it's a big ask out of a player like that. I don't think the Lakers are asking Dalton Connect to go defend the other team's best player for the majority of the game.
No, they're hiding him. But the other thing, I do think the matchup last night against Dallas, I do think underscores something I think I said on the pod a couple weeks ago that I think I believe about Wells. I think he is certainly better than anyone could have expected defensively already. But I do think he is better scaling down than scaling up physically. I think he has looked better guarding smaller players and like the way he fights around screens and sticks with guys. Where when you get a 6'8" physical player like Luka, I think that is a harder guard for him than to guard, the 6'3" guy where he's using his size to contest shots and he's sort of sticking with the guys. I think he's better scaling down defensively than scaling up. I wonder about that a little bit in the fit with Ja and Dez, where I think maybe you want your three to be able to scale down a little bit more. That's like a small, like hyper specific thing, but Wells has been great.
All right, schedule coming up. You got the Kings at home on Thursday. You got 2 road games on a back-to-back Saturday, Sunday, Boston and Washington. Kings at home is a game you probably hope to win. Winning on the road at the Celtics is a big ask. And then the 2-17 Wizards. The Grizzlies got 2 games added to their schedule following their elimination in the NBA Cup. And of course, the Grizzlies are getting the Brooklyn Nets.
Oh my God, again.
And the Los Angeles Lakers. So, 2 teams, the Lakers, a team that the Grizzlies clearly have a lot of dislike for. They got to go on the road all the way out to LA in between games in Memphis, which that's got to be a disappointment for them. That's a bummer, but at least you have a long layoff between the games. It'll be Sunday the 15th against the Lakers. And it'll be Friday the 13th against the Brooklyn Nets at home. Yeah,
they need a revenge game against Brooklyn. They need a revenge. They're 0-2 against Brooklyn. That's a revenge game at FedEx Forum on that Friday. Surely you're not going to go 0-3 against Brooklyn this season.
I don't know what they need to do, but someone needs to come and figure out a way to change the energy. Put a curse on Dennis Schroeder, who just absolutely kills the Grizzlies.
Burn some
feels
sage.
Like burn some sage. Yes,
it is funny how the schedule stuff has done this now, where you get 3 games against Brooklyn. Last season, I believe it was 3 games against Detroit. That situation created. So it's sort of a little odd thing.
Well, it'll be another fun week in Grizzlies basketball as we approach the holidays. Anything else, Chris, before we get out of here?
It sounds like Zach Edey, might be back. Maybe he'll be back this weekend for one of those Boston-Washington games. If not, it sounds like almost definitely he'll be back in time for that Brooklyn game, which is more than a week away.
Yeah, he was doing stuff on the court at shoot around yesterday morning. He had like a ankle, I don't like brace type thing. He was doing 1-on-0, so I got to see some of that. Um, and yeah, Taylor Jenkins says they're hopeful for the weekend, so that'll be big for the Grizzlies, literally.
I do think the game at Boston, and that's set up like if you're gonna lose a game by 30, it seems like that's the one you're gonna lose, right? If you're the Grizzlies, is at Boston. Not only is Boston great and you're on the road, but I think there's matchup problems there. But I think that's another pretty good test game. Like I would feel good about going into Boston, even if they lose. I'd feel good about going into Boston and having that be a competitive game down the stretch. So I think that's a pretty good test game for the team.
Yes, that's been a place where the Grizzlies have really struggled.
I know. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah. What I don't love about the schedule is that you have to go to Washington the day after that game.
Right.
Because if you play in a close one and you expend a lot of energy, now you got to turn around and go on the second night of a back-to-back in a sleepy environment on a Sunday against the Wizards. I don't know. That one's sneaky. But yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, they were rolling prior to this Mavericks game, and if they can keep any of the momentum, they'll come home and take care of business against the Sacramento Kings coming up.
Hey, as bad as that fourth quarter was, a 5-point road loss against a pretty much full strength Mavericks team coming off a 6-game win streak, you know, that's a game. That's a game you're mad about the game, but you're not upset about where your team is.
And they had them. They were up 13 in the fourth quarter. They had them on the ropes. Should have won the game. Yeah, you can't beat yourself up too much over that loss if you're Memphis. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. We'll be back next week to break down more Grizz on the pod. Go listen to all the other Daily Memphian podcasts, the Tigers podcast. Hey, Tigers are ranked. You got your Tigers shirt on today, Chris. Tigers are ranked in basketball and football.
Got a University of Memphis sweatshirt on. I'm repping the hood here in Minnesota today. This is true.
There you go. So go check that out. Go check out all our other good stuff over at the Daily Memphian. That's going to do it for us, for Drew, and for Chris. We're out of here.